edition of the 12 Days of Innovation Summit. We are so excited to have Kristy Lathrop here. I know her. She's friends. Former colleagues with my wife, and so we're just really excited to have her here, being a part of the 12 days. She's also, from what I understand, quite the expert in PBL, and so we're going to try and tap into her expertise today with this session. So, Kristy, you want to take some time to introduce yourself?
So, hey, yeah, I'm Kristy Lathrop. I live in Colorado. I was a classroom teacher. I was a middle school science teacher for 8 years. Since leaving the science classroom, I've been supporting education all over the country through project-based learning and focusing on deeper learning. And I've had some really cool opportunities to coach teachers in most of the states and then also abroad. And I am very passionate about deeper learning being accessible to all of our students. I think it's not just something that's nice for our students. I think it's an imperative that we have to provide these opportunities for deeper learning.
Very cool. Well, we're excited to be able to, I say we, it's just me in here, but we as a team are excited to have you be a part of this. So PBL, project-based learning, for those that aren't familiar, take us through the importance of that. Why is PBL, why does it lead maybe open a door faster to deeper learning? And why is it important at all levels of education? Some might argue that PBL is good for high school because, you're getting them ready, but PBL can fit with the littles. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think PBL is essential for all of our students because the world we live in is project-based. If you think about some of the most meaningful learning experiences that you've had recently, they probably come from productive struggle, and they come along with some cycles of inquiry, whether it's doing like a home improvement project where you are maybe trying to install some new flooring and you think you have all the materials you need, and then you realize that you have a lot more to learn. And then this also exists in the academic and the work world as well, where we need to be able to collaborate, we need to be able to manage projects, we need to be able to present, and project-based learning is a vehicle for that. And so what I've seen is that students who experience project-based learning at an early age are going to be more prepared at every level to be successful in learning and be successful in life. And project-based learning, it looks a little different at every grade level. It's absolutely possible at every grade level. It's just going to look a little bit different based on your students' developmental preparedness and based on your community context. So it's not something that's prescribed. It's not a curriculum. It's really a philosophy in education. And it's the best practices, the best of the best in education.
So I want to throw out just a misconception here and have you talk into that. Project-based learning is not students listening to me lecture for the whole unit and then submitting a project. Project-based learning is a process that from start to finish, the students are learning along the way. Can you add into that?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you're bringing that up. There was this fantastic paper written by John Mergendaler and John Marmer, and they are some of the thought leaders internationally in project-based learning, and they define project-based learning as being the main course, not the dessert. Because sometimes when people say they're doing project-based learning, they're actually doing projects. And so we want, instead of doing the learning and then giving the students the project at the end, we want for students to experience this intellectual challenge of learning through the project. So you're still going to have some direct instruction. You're still going to have some note-taking. You still might have some labs and experiments, but they're all for the purpose of accomplishing this challenge, this intellectual challenge that's set before them.
So can you share maybe a little bit of your experience as far as transitioning in your class and getting to where you are because it's easy sometimes for teachers who talk to our team as, digital learning specialists, for you as a PBL consultant, oh, well, that's just your life. That's easy for you to do. But at some point there was a transition. At some point I fell in love with the idea of innovating learning in my classroom. And you fell in love with the idea of deeper learning in PBL, and especially in science. And so can you talk through that transition, what that looked like for you?
You bet. Yeah, I came to project-based learning from a place of necessity. Uh, I felt like I was not connecting with my students. I wasn't very successful as a teacher. My students weren't retaining the content. I didn't feel like I had really strong relationships with them. And when they did learn the content, like a lot of times at the end of the year, it felt like nothing was done with the content. And so I came to project-based learning from a place of necessity. And I realized that I needed to do something more. And project-based learning is this context through which students engage with the content in a much deeper way. And so the learning is going to stick. The learning is going to be meaningful and authentic to them. And they're also going to be developing some key competencies and skills that they need to be successful beyond just school.
So you mentioned how the relationship piece with your students, and maybe even in some ways, there's a lot of research and information out there now about the social emotional levels of students in the classroom and the importance of that. How does PBL encourage that? How does it encourage that SEL? How does it encourage the teacher-student relationship with just through that process?
Yeah, I mean, let's just start off by calling out the fact that all good teaching starts with relationships. And relationship building, it's not just something that's nice to do, it's essential. We are social creatures, we learn socially, and so therefore we need to have relationships in order to have that foundation for learning. But what I'd love to do, I'd love to share my screen real quick, and I'm gonna show you real quickly the framework from CASTLE. So some people might already be familiar with this framework from CASTLE. And what you see here in the center is you see some of these domains of social and emotional learning. So CASTLE, I want to say, what was it, 20 or 30 years ago is when they started to define social and emotional learning. And these are how they're defining it: self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, social awareness. So these are the things that we want for our students to have in social and emotional learning, these things that we want them to develop in order to be successful and prepared for life, whether it's academically or prepared for life outside of academia. And so what I'm going to do real quick is I want to show you, I'm going to put that right up against the framework for high quality project-based learning. So I'm going to share my screen again. All right, so this is the framework for high quality project-based learning. And so these are the things that we are saying are necessary in order for students to experience project-based learning that leads to deeper learning. We want our students to experience this intellectual challenge and authenticity, and there needs to be a public product. But this is where I'm really seeing that social and emotional learning come into play. Because in high quality project-based learning, students are collaborating, which means they're doing more than just working together. They're learning how to give one another feedback. They're learning how to deprivatize their thinking so they can learn from one another. In high quality project-based learning, students are also experiencing project management. So they learn some skills towards goals and progress, towards managing the process of project-based learning. And then as well, they're engaging in reflection. And this is key to unlocking so much deeper learning because as John Dewey said, you don't learn from experience, you learn from reflecting on experience. And so reflection is what creates, one of my colleagues, Eric White, he refers to it as Velcro moments. That's when the learning becomes sticky and it sticks. So when you put the SEL framework up against the high quality project-based learning framework, you can see a lot of overlap, and you can see how project-based learning is a perfect vehicle for students to experience and develop the skills they need to be successful in social and emotional learning. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
So, I mean, it's a great connection, right? We're wanting to, give students ownership. We're wanting to make them producers, not consumers, through the PBL experience. Looking at that high quality PBL structure or framework that you put up there, and thinking about that, I see a lot of teachers where the hair on the back of their neck starts to raise, and they get really nervous because moving into this direction, even in just those categories that you were presenting, not knowing anything else, that requires the absence of control in a traditional sense as a teacher. Like, I can control the test and I can control the notes that they take and things like that. Like, what advice do you have for teachers that want to move into PBL but are so, and maybe not even teachers, maybe even administrators who are hesitant to encourage their teachers to do this because it's so out of kind of the traditional classroom sort of model?
I would say, first of all, start small. Start small. Identify some places in units or projects that you already do with your students, and identify some places in which you can integrate some of these elements of high quality project-based learning and build on those successes. Another thing that I would say is give yourself permission to make mistakes. It usually takes teachers about 3 to 5 years to make the shift towards project-based learning, to feel like you've got your head around what it is and what it should look like for your students. And another piece of advice that I have is that we do all of this not for the sake of doing high quality PBL or doing SEL. This is all about making learning better for kids. And so we're never going to just have our students, we give them a challenge and we send them off on their way. That's not how that works. We're going to have to scaffold. We're going to have to ensure that the learning experiences are aligned with the standards that we are contractually obligated in some ways to intentionally teach and assess. We're going to make sure that our students have the support they need to collaborate, to think more critically, to think more deeply. So we have to look at, and I encourage everybody to look at this as a process of growth and a process that takes time. And that whole thing about like failing forward, it's a real thing. Sometimes I think about engaging in project-based learning for the first few times is like when I go camping with my family. And we make pancakes, or I'm always in charge of making the pancakes when we go camping with my family. And typically the first pancake that I make is undercooked. And then the second pancake I make is usually burned. And the third pancake I make starts to get a little better. And by the fourth one, like, it's golden brown, and they are just getting better and better and better. And that's the way that project-based learning goes. And it goes that way because the first time you learn what support your students need, you learn what other things you need to experience and what strategies and tools you need to pull in. And so the first project might not go great. The second one might go a little bit better, but maybe not. So never give up on it after the first couple tries. Stick with it. It gets better. It takes time. And you've got to really start small and build on those successes.
Absolutely. You have to start small and have to be willing to make the mistake. And what an impact on your students to say that we're going to be going through this process, and then something causes it to not work the way that you're expecting. And you can communicate that to the students, so they are seeing that example of learning happening to the person who's supposed to know everything in their life, right? So then let's talk about the elephant in the room. because we talk about PBL, we talk about how great it is, how it can just enhance all learning, makes deeper learning. But there's this big little thing in the room called standardized tests. So, Kristy, how does that connect? Again, that control. I know the way that I've done my class gets my students prepared for the test that they're supposed to pass. How does PBL affect standardized learning? Do you have examples of that? Share with us just how those connect.
Yeah, happy to. And I would definitely say it's more than a big little thing. Like in public education, that's a huge thing. And project-based learning, if it is done well, if it's aligned with the standards, the research shows that students are going to be as successful, if not more successful, through project-based learning. And I've got some research briefs that I can send to you that people can take a look at as well. There's been a lot of research that's been done on it. And so basically right now, the research says that if project-based learning is done well, it can create these conditions in which students, they learn the content and they retain it in a much deeper way. So the key is that we need to ensure that our projects are aligned with our standards. So when our students are creating products as part of project-based learning, we might have to put some boundaries and we might have to put some expectations on those products of student learning, because we want to ensure that we are asking our students to do things that we can use as evidence of the learning that they've engaged in. And so let's say, for example, your students are engaging in a project in which they are redesigning a space for a social change. And in your project, you say that you are trying to assess scale and proportion and critical thinking and speaking and listening skills. Like those are the things that you're trying to intentionally teach and assess. That final product that the students create needs to allow students to demonstrate mastery of those things. And so you're going to want to have your students create products that show you that they understand scale and proportion. You want your students to have an opportunity to present their thinking, because through presenting their thinking, you're able to understand the depth at which they engaged in critical thinking. You're able to understand the depth of their understanding of the content that they've been learning and how well they're able to answer questions and speak to the lessons that they've learned. Now, the other piece too is that we can still use all of our traditional teaching tools, all of our traditional assessment tools still fit in project-based learning. You can still have quizzes. You can still have matching. You can still have short constructed response, because we can use these things along the way as part of the project to assess where students are and for them to assess their own understanding of the content. And in using these traditional teaching tools that are aligned with the standardized tests, our students are still going to have the chance to practice the test-taking modalities that they will experience when they get to the standardized test as well. So the two are certainly not mutually exclusive. They can fit together really well, but you have to be so intentional in order to make these connections happen. We want the learning to be not just hands-on, we want it to be minds-on. We need to go beyond the learning being hands-on. And so in order for it to be minds-on, we have to be intentional about how we plan, about how we support students, about how we assess students, and how we include them in all of these processes so that they are owning the learning as well.
That's excellent. Good. That's a great way to think about it, that we're not spending a whole semester, a whole year preparing them to learn how to bubble a test. It's about the learning, and so let's create environments that make it stick and make it grow in those students in that way. So I think another curiosity, and I might be throwing you a curveball here, another curiosity from teachers who are not in a PBL environment and who've never experienced a PBL environment, you know, a misconception could be that, oh, well, she just said, you know, you start small and then there are failures and then you've got all this stuff that's happening and going on. But when you get into the system of a PBL, you know, what did your classroom look like right before you know, when you were in the midst of a project? How were you connecting with students? You talked about how you can still use the quizzes, you can still use the matching questions. I mean, what did that kind of look like on a day-to-day for you with the class? Because when I think about being a teacher, or when I talk to someone about being a teacher, the picture that comes in my mind is my high school history class where I'm sitting down, I'm taking notes on the notes that my teacher wrote on the board. And so obviously that's changing with online learning and things like that. But what does it look like? What does a PBL classroom look like in the midst of a project?
A PBL classroom is going to look different every day of a project. It never looks the exact same every day. And it looks a little bit different based on the needs of your students. And so let's talk about the process of a project, like the general path of learning of a project. All projects launch with an entry event. All projects launch inquiry. And so, because project-based learning is a model of inquiry. And so in the very beginning of your project, the students are part of generating some questions about this challenge, about the things that they feel like they need to know. And it's going to be incomplete at first, but you've got these questions that you can start with and you can use. And so as a teacher, there's a whole spectrum of project-based learning. On the more, there's a whole spectrum of project-based learning. So on the simpler side, on the more structured side, you're using those questions to contextualize the learning. So as a teacher, before you engage in the project, you anticipate what questions the students are going to ask. And you also anticipate the things that you know that they're going to need to learn. And so you plan out loosely learning experiences throughout the project. And so some of those learning experiences might be a quick lecture. It could be that the students need to learn something about some of the push-pull factors when it came to immigration. And so sometimes the quickest way to learn that is through a quick lecture from the teacher. Sometimes you will have learning experiences where the students engage in a virtual or real field study, where they meet with an expert and they ask them questions and they learn about this content out in the field. Sometimes you might have stations happening in your classroom. The daily 5 that exists in elementary classrooms is really powerful in project-based learning. And so with some students in small groups might be engaging in, it could be that they are practicing finding area using like Cheez-Its or something. And it could be that in another station, the students are practicing their presentation. And it could be that in another station, the teacher is facilitating a small group reading activity. And so all of these different things that might happen are happening in response to the project, and they all fit within the big story of the project. And some days you have work days. Some days are days when the students are engaging in developing products that are part of the process of project-based learning. And so they might be collaborating in small groups and working. And so there's a big mix of individual learning, whole group learning, small group learning. There's also a mix of work time and learning time. There are days when they're giving and receiving feedback. So the learning is really different every day. and it's really rich every day. And I'm sure that you're picking up on it's going to be really engaging every day because we're working through so many different modalities of learning.
It sounds like it. It sounds like, uh, you know, school would have been a little bit different if I had experienced it that way. So that's great. Thank you, Kristy. It brings some good ideas and strategies for as we think about this. So tell us a little bit about what you do and kind of where you're at and projects you are working on.
Yeah, so I wear a few different hats. One of the things that I do is I am a national faculty member for PBL Works, and they're one of the thought leaders. They and Edutopia are the two primary thought leaders in the world when it comes to project-based learning. And so with them, I facilitate workshops and I coach teachers, and I develop workshops as well. I develop professional development. I also do some work with a couple other groups as well, one of which is applied coaching for projects. And with that group, we have been focusing on more of the domains within SEL. So for example, over the summer, we wrote a free ebook for teachers to support teachers in this new era in which some of us are remote and some of us are engaging in learning in like a socially distanced way, but we still want our students to experience collaboration. And so we wrote a free ebook for teachers to, with strategies for them to be able to support their students in collaboration and all of these different like strange things that we're experiencing right now. We also have another ebook that'll be coming out, I think at the beginning, in the beginning of 2021. That'll be about social and emotional learning, because we've noticed that there are many resources out there for social and emotional learning. And as teachers, we really appreciate knowing how to do it. And so this ebook will be about making social and emotional learning practical. And I think we'll release an online course with that as well. And otherwise, I'm also a mom. I'm a project-based learning parent. My daughter goes to a school that engages in project-based learning. So I love project-based learning so much and believe in it so much that I really wanted my daughter to go to the neighborhood school that engages in project-based learning.
So you're in project-based learning. What do you say to parents that are teachers are transitioning into a PBL, and parents, the phrase that we hear the most often is, well, I didn't do it that way, and obviously with COVID, we're in a time of like, well, no, none of us have done it this way. But with PBL, that's a concern from a teacher perspective as well. So if I change this, parents are going to be upset. What advice would you have for the parents out there?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is that as a parent, project-based learning is amazing. My daughter initially resisted writing. She resisted writing. And I remember this project that one of her teachers engaged her in that was about, let's see here, it was a simulation of immigration through Ellis Island. And in that simulation, my daughter, part of the project was my daughter writing a journal from the perspective of this individual. What was her name? Marie Boulet, who was an immigrant from France. And my daughter had to write a journal from Marie Boulet's perspective. I always stumble over it because that's the way my daughter always said it, from her perspective. And it was neat to see my daughter's passion for writing grow because of that. Also, the other cool thing that I've seen as a parent is my daughter can stand in front of a room, even as a second grader, and give a presentation to the room and field and answer questions. And so because of project-based learning, because of these amazing teachers that she's had and the opportunities that she's had, it's developed her into this person who is going to have these skills that are going to make her so successful in life. And I just treasure those things. The other thing I would say as a parent, and advice for parents, yeah, and ask how you can support. In project-based learning, having that public product, having an authentic audience is key to making the learning and the inquiry deeper and more rich. So let teachers know what your experiences are and what your expertise is. Right. So the other thing I can offer for parents, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Last year, when COVID started and caught us all by surprise, my daughter's teacher and I were having a conversation about project-based learning and what it might look like in this remote environment. And so one of the things that I did for her to support her was I took a project that already exists from the PBL Works project library, and I adapted it to be parent and student facing so that parents and students could engage in project-based learning and see what it looks like and what it might feel like. And so that's what this is here that I'm showing you right now. This is this project that I adapted from PBL Works, and it gives a little bit of information about it as well as the project path, the path of learning in project-based learning. And then it takes parents and students through the different phases of project-based learning. And admittedly, this is fairly linear, and I made it fairly linear to simplify it for parents. Project-based learning is not linear, but again, I was trying to keep it simple for parents. And so it takes them through the experience of launching a project. And then also what it feels like to build knowledge. And there's a slide deck built in here that leads students through building some knowledge and learning about photojournalism. And then what it means to develop a product. We say so often in education that we wish our students would have growth mindsets, right? And so project-based learning helps to unlock that because you develop products along the way. You don't develop your products right at the end, and you get feedback and improve. And then it also takes them into this last phase of presenting a product. So I'll make sure that this is something that the folks who are listening, I'll make sure that you have access to this as well, and you can check out some of the different phases here and how this project was adapted and put online. And this could be something you share with parents too, to let them see what project-based learning might look like.
Very cool. Well, thank you for that, Kristy. And thank you for, I know you've got a whole other web page for us that we'll share onto the page that will share all the links to your website and the resources that you've brought together. But thank you so much for being a part of this and sharing your expertise. PBL is something that is so powerful, and you're seeing it within your own daughter and all with all the schools you're working with. I hope that more can reach out and just dive into PBL and just see and experience what the potential it is that's there.
Thanks. Yeah. And thanks a lot for having me. And for all the teachers who are listening, this is such a challenging time. This is possibly the hardest time ever to be teachers. And I see how hard you're working. So many people see how hard you're working. Thank you for what you're doing for your students. Thank you for innovating. Thank you for investing in your students, for building these relationships. It's going to get better, and it's going to get better because of you, because of the work that you're doing. So thank you for having me, and thank you for listening, and let me know how I can support folks.